The morning sun streamed through the blinds in Robert Chen's office at FBI headquarters. Coffee in hand, he thumbed through a thick folder of reports with a deep frown on his face. After 24 years with the Bureau, Chen had seen plenty of criminal schemes, but this one made his blood boil. He wasn't supposed to be doing fieldwork anymore. At 53, with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses perched on his nose, Chen had climbed all the way to FBI director. His days of stakeouts and undercover work were meant to be behind him. But as he studied the photos of Officer Pete Dawson laughing with known drug dealers, he knew this case needed something special. "They think they're untouchable," said Lisa, his chief analyst, as she placed another stack of evidence on his desk. "We've got solid intel on at least 8 officers in the Oakdale PD taking bribes, planting evidence, even helping move drugs through town." Chen nodded, picking up a photo of a young man, just a teenager really, who'd been framed and was now serving 10 years for a crime he didn't commit. "How many innocent people in jail because of these guys?" he asked quietly. "At least 16 we know of," Lisa replied. "And 2 witnesses who were going to testify? Both had mysterious accidents." Chen stood up and walked to the window, looking out at Washington, D.C. spread before him. The American flag fluttered on a nearby building, reminding him of the oath he'd taken all those years ago. "We've tried traditional investigations," he said. "They always get tipped off. Someone high up must be protecting them." Lisa sighed. "The corruption goes deep. Maybe as high as Judge Taylor or the DA's office. Anyone we send in will get made instantly." Chen was quiet for a long moment, an idea forming in his mind. It was unusual, risky even, but it might just work. "What if they didn't recognize who they were dealing with?" he said slowly. "What if the new guy in town was someone they'd never suspect?" Lisa looked confused. "What are you thinking, sir?" Chen turned, a determined glint in his eye. "I'm thinking it's time for the director to get his hands dirty again." The room fell silent. Lisa stared at him in disbelief. "You can't be serious," she finally said. "You're the FBI director. You can't just go undercover. There are protocols, regulations." "That these cops have been using against us," Chen cut in. "They know all our usual moves. They're expecting agents." "They're not expecting me." Over the next week, heated arguments filled the secure conference room as Chen laid out his plan to the small circle of trusted agents who would support the operation. "It's too dangerous," argued Deputy Director Tom Walsh. "What if someone recognizes you?" Chen clicked to a new slide showing himself with dyed black hair, colored contacts, and supple facial prosthetics. "I haven't done public appearances in Oakdale. Most of these cops wouldn't recognize me if I passed them on the street." "But sir," another agent protested, "if anything happens to you, then you'll have protocols to follow," Chen said firmly. "But I'm not asking anyone to take a risk I wouldn't take myself. Those people in Oakdale need justice." 3 weeks later, Robert Chen officially took medical leave. His close friends received occasional messages about his recovery at a private facility. His wife, one of the few who knew the truth, maintained the story perfectly. And in Oakdale, a wealthy businessman named Richard Chung moved into the luxury lakeside development, driving a sleek black Mercedes and asking quiet questions about who really ran the town. As he unpacked boxes in his new home, he placed hidden cameras in strategic locations and prepared for the most important undercover mission of his career. He had 6 months to bring down an entire network of corrupt cops who thought they were above the law. Nobody in Oakdale had any idea that their new neighbor was actually the FBI director himself. Richard Chung became a familiar face around Oakdale within weeks. He joined the country club, ate at the best restaurants, and always tipped generously. Behind the friendly smile and expensive suits, Robert Chen was working harder than he had in years. "Good morning, Mr. Chung," called the barista at Lakeside Coffee as he walked in. "The usual?" Chen nodded with a warm smile. "Thanks, Kelly. How's the college application going?" "Just submitted to state yesterday," she beamed, making his latte. These small connections were important. Chen meticulously built his cover story brick by brick, day by day. He talked about real estate developments in California, mentioned his divorce 2 years ago, and complained about tax regulations just enough to seem like any other wealthy businessman. Back at his house, he carefully documented everything. Each night, he'd secure the bathroom with signal jammers, turn on the shower, and send encrypted updates to his small support team. The bathroom became his only truly safe space, where he could be Robert Chen again, even if just for 15 minutes. The poker game at the country club was interesting, he whispered into his secure phone. Chief Reynolds lost $5,000 but didn't seem worried about it. That's 3 months of his salary gone in one night. Living alone as Richard Chang wasn't easy. He missed his wife's laugh, his daughter's college stories during their Sunday calls. The isolation wore on him more than he had expected. Sometimes he caught himself almost slipping, nearly mentioning FBI procedures when discussing local crimes at the bar, or reaching for his real wallet instead of Chang's. "You're new around here," a gruff voice said one evening as Chen nursed a whiskey at the Blue Harbor, a waterfront bar known to be a gathering spot for off-duty cops. Chen looked up to see Officer Dave Wilson, whose file he had memorized, 13 complaints of excessive force, all mysteriously dropped. "Just moved in last month," Chen replied, carefully adjusting his posture to appear slightly guarded but not hostile. "Nice part of town you picked," Wilson said, signaling the bartender for a drink. "Not cheap, though." Chen shrugged. "Business has been good." "What line of work, if you don't mind me asking?" Wilson's tone was casual, but his eyes were calculating. "Real estate development. Some import-export on the side." Chen let that hang in the air, the deliberate vagueness an invitation for speculation. Over the next few weeks, these chance encounters continued. Officer Wilson introduced Chen to his partner, Officer Garrett, a younger cop with expensive tastes. They asked friendly questions that weren't actually friendly, where he got his money, who he knew in town, what his business plans were. Chen played his part perfectly, dropping hints about shipments coming in, connections on the West Coast, and his frustration with government busybodies who got in the way of business. The real test came on a rainy Tuesday night. Chen was eating dinner alone at Mancini's Italian restaurant when Garrett slid into the booth across from him, uninvited. "My friend, I think we should talk," Garrett said quietly. "You've been making some interesting moves around town, buying property near the docks, asking questions about warehouse space." Chen tensed slightly, as Richard Chang would. "Just exploring business opportunities." Garrett smiled thinly. "Oakdale can be very welcoming to businessmen like yourself. But it can also be complicated. Permits get delayed. Inspections become thorough. Shipments get searched." "That sounds inconvenient," Chen replied carefully. "Very. But some of us can help make sure things run smoothly." Garrett leaned forward. "For a reasonable monthly consideration, of course." Chen took a sip of his wine, hiding his triumph behind the glass. After 2 months of careful work, the corrupt cops had finally made their move. "I've always believed in building good relationships with local authorities," Chen said. "Perhaps we could discuss the details somewhere more private." Garrett's smile widened. "I think this is the beginning of a very profitable friendship, Mr. Chang." Little did he know, he had just invited the FBI director himself into their corrupt operation, and Robert Chen was recording every word. The first payment was $20,000 in cash, handed over in the back room of a pool hall. Chen made sure to count it twice, the way a cautious businessman would. "Consider it an investment in community relations," he told Officer Garrett with a knowing smile. That money, carefully documented by the FBI beforehand, opened doors that had been firmly shut. Chen was now in, part of Oakdale's corrupt inner circle. He was invited to poker games at Officer Wilson's lake house, where judges and city officials talked openly about taking care of problems and managing situations. "You should have seen this guy Thompson last week," Officer Garrett laughed one night, beer in hand. "Swore he wasn't speeding, so I told him how his tail light looked broken to me. He mimicked smashing something with his baton. Then I asked if he wanted a fix-it ticket or something worse." The others laughed. Chen forced himself to join in, though his stomach turned. He was witnessing the casual cruelty that had terrorized Oakdale for years. Judge Preston, a gray-haired man with cold eyes, noticed Chen's slight hesitation. "Not too squeamish, are you, Chan?" "Just calculating the cost-benefit," Chen replied smoothly. "In my business, unnecessary force creates unnecessary problems." The judge nodded approvingly. "Smart man. That's why we like you. You understand systems." Over the next few months, Chen carefully expanded his role in their network. He offered his waterfront home for meetings, knowing every room was wired with FBI recording devices. He volunteered to hold packages occasionally, sealed evidence from drug busts that mysteriously disappeared before trial. Each item was secretly photographed and catalogued before being returned exactly as it had been left. The deeper he got, the more disturbing the revelations became. One rainy night, Assistant District Attorney Powell got drunk and boasted about how they'd framed a local shop owner who refused to pay protection money. Men had no record, not even a parking ticket, Powell slurred. Now he's doing 15 years because Officer Wilson found 2 kilos of cocaine in his storeroom. He winked dramatically. Amazing what turns up when you have the right people searching. Chen thought about the shop owner's family, the lives destroyed by this corruption. He recorded every word, adding it to the growing mountain of evidence. "Chan, I might have a business opportunity for you," Chief Reynolds said one afternoon on the golf course. "We've got these seized properties. City auctions them for pennies on the dollar. With your real estate background, you could flip them for serious profit. We just need someone clean to be the public face." "I'm always interested in good investments," Chen replied, making a mental note to dig into property seizure records. Working both sides was exhausting. By day, Chen played the corrupt businessman, attending meetings with dirty cops and crooked officials. By night, he meticulously documented everything, sending encrypted files to his FBI team. The strain began to show, dark circles under his eyes, a slight tremor in his hands from too much coffee and too little sleep. His only relief came during his secure calls to Lisa at the FBI. "We've identified 17 officers involved so far," he whispered one night from his bathroom sanctuary. "Plus 2 judges, the ADA, and someone in the mayor's office." "This is bigger than we thought," Lisa replied, concern evident in her voice. "Director, maybe it's time to pull out. We have enough." "Not yet," Chen cut her off. "We still don't know who's protecting them from the top. And we haven't found the missing evidence from the Rodriguez case." What Chen didn't say was how personal this had become. He'd watched Officer Wilson rough up a teenager for disrespect. He'd seen Judge Preston dismiss charges against a wealthy businessman's son while sentencing a poor kid to maximum time for the same offense. This wasn't just about building a case anymore, it was about justice for a town that had been under siege for years. Just a little longer, he promised Lisa and himself. He didn't know that the clock was already ticking down. Someone was getting suspicious, and Chen's carefully constructed world was about to face its biggest test. The first sign of trouble came on an ordinary Tuesday. Chen was having lunch at the Oakdale Grill when he noticed Officer Wilson watching him from across the restaurant, talking quietly into his phone. Usually, Wilson would have come over with a slap on the back and a crude joke. Today, he just stared. Later that afternoon, Chen's secured phone buzzed with a message from Lisa. "UOGENT, Agent Collins may be compromised." Chen's blood ran cold. Collins was his main contact, the agent who collected his evidence drops and maintained his emergency extraction plan. If Collins had been identified, he forced himself to stay calm as he deleted the message and went about his day as Richard Chang would, picking up dry cleaning, stopping by the bank, smiling at neighbors. But his mind was racing, searching for any mistake he might have made, any slip that could have exposed the operation. That night, his doorbell rang at 9:30 p.m. Chen checked the security camera to see Officers Garrett and Wilson standing on his porch, faces unusually serious. "Evening, gentlemen," Chen said as he opened the door, keeping his tone light despite the alarm bells ringing in his head. "Bit late for a social call." "Need to talk, Chang," Garrett said, brushing past him into the house. Privately, Chen led them to his living room, offering drinks which they declined. He sat in his armchair, positioned so he could reach the hidden panic button under the side table if needed. "Something interesting came up today," Wilson said, his eyes never leaving Chen's face. FBI agent was asking questions around town. "About you." Chen raised his eyebrows in practiced surprise. "FBI? What would they want with me?" "That's what we wondered," Garrett continued. "Then this agent meets with a guy who looks just like your assistant, the one who visits every few weeks." Chen's mind raced. They must have been watching his drops with Collins. He hadn't noticed the surveillance. I don't have an assistant, Chen replied calmly. My business partner from California visits occasionally, Ben Wong. Perhaps that's who you saw. Wilson's laugh had no humor in it. Funny thing about this FBI agent. He had a car accident this afternoon. Bad one. Chen felt sick. That's unfortunate. Very, Garrett agreed. Before the ambulance arrived, local cops found some interesting pictures in his car. Pictures of you. Pictures of us. The room seemed to grow colder. Chen knew Collins would never have carried physical photos. That wasn't protocol. These cops were setting a trap, watching for his reaction. I don't understand, Chen said, allowing genuine confusion to show. Why would an FBI agent have pictures of me? That's what we'd like to know, Wilson said, standing suddenly. Maybe we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. Take a ride with us. This was the moment. If Chen left with them, he might not come back. They were taking him somewhere to interrogate him, or worse. But if he refused, he'd confirm their suspicions instantly. 24 years of field experience kicked in. Chen laughed, the sound surprisingly natural even to his own ears. You guys are testing me, aren't you? He said, shaking his head. Very funny. Both officers stared at him. Look, Chen continued, if the FBI is watching me, they're watching you too. We've done business together. But I'm not stupid enough to talk to feds. He leaned forward. You really think I'd risk everything I've built? For what? A tense silence filled the room. Then Garrett's phone rang. He answered, listened, then nodded to Wilson. We got another situation, he told his partner. Need to handle it now. As they moved toward the door, Wilson turned back to Chen. We've got a meeting tomorrow night. Big one. Everyone will be there. Beach house on Morrison Lake. The implied threat was clear. Show up or you're guilty. I'll bring the good scotch, Chen replied with a confidence he didn't feel. After they left, he slumped against the door, heart pounding. Collins might really be hurt. His cover was in jeopardy. And tomorrow night could be either a legitimate meeting or an ambush. He had less than 24 hours to prepare for either possibility, knowing that one wrong move could cost him everything, including his life. Morning light filtered through the blinds as Chen finished his encrypted message to Lisa. If I don't check in by midnight, activate Protocol 6. He took a deep breath before adding Collins' status. Her reply came quickly. Stable. Cover intact. They staged accident but didn't harm him. Likely testing your reaction. That was something at least. Chen spent the day preparing, both as Richard Chang and as FBI director. He transferred seemingly suspicious funds, made coded phone calls that would appear incriminating if intercepted, and visited his bank's safe deposit box, all while being obviously followed by an unmarked police car. The beach house meeting started normally enough. Chief Reynolds was there, along with Judge Preston, ADA Powell, and 5 officers including Garrett and Wilson. They drank, played poker, and discussed their usual corrupt business. Chen matched their behavior drink for drink, though he secretly poured most of his whiskey into a plant when no one was looking. So, Chang, Chief Reynolds said casually around midnight, we have a problem with a shipment coming in tomorrow. Feds might be watching. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Every eye in the room turned to Chen. He could feel the tension, thick as smoke. If I knew federal agents were watching my shipments, Chen replied evenly, I wouldn't be sitting here playing cards. I'd be on my way to somewhere with no extradition treaty. The chief studied him, then nodded slowly. The conversation shifted, but Chen could feel they weren't convinced. Something had changed. Their easy trust was gone. 3 days later, everything fell apart. Chen was having breakfast at the Lakeside Cafe when 6 police officers stormed in, weapons drawn. Richard Chang, you're under arrest for drug trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy, Officer Wilson announced loudly, a satisfied smirk on his face. The cafe fell silent as Chen was handcuffed and led outside, where news cameras were already waiting. This wasn't a normal arrest. This was a show, carefully staged for maximum publicity. At the station, they found 2 kilos of cocaine in his car. At his house, their search uncovered offshore banking documents and a hidden gun with the serial number filed off. All planted, of course, but the evidence looked overwhelming. Ken's expensive attorney, Mr. Patel, arrived looking properly concerned. What the corrupt cops didn't know was that Patel was actually an FBI lawyer, carefully briefed on the real situation. "This is outrageous," Patel protested as Chen was processed. "My client is a respected businessman. These charges are absurd." His objections fell on deaf ears. In the interrogation room, Garrett and Wilson took turns playing good cop, bad cop. "We know you've been talking to the feds," Wilson growled. "Tell us what you told them, and maybe we can help you." Chen maintained his businessman persona, concerned, indignant, slightly frightened. "I haven't told anyone anything because there's nothing to tell. I run legitimate businesses." His bail hearing was before Judge Harmon, a thin man with glasses who'd been part of the corrupt network for years. Despite Patel's arguments about Chen's ties to the community and lack of criminal record, bail was denied. "The defendant poses a significant flight risk," Judge Harmon intoned solemnly. "Given the serious nature of these charges and evidence of offshore accounts, Mr. Chang will be remanded to custody until trial." As Chen was led away in handcuffs, he caught Wilson and Garrett bumping fists in the back of the courtroom. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd silenced a potential threat by framing him, just as they'd done to countless others in Oakdale. For 3 weeks, Chen sat in the county jail, maintaining his cover even there. His preliminary hearing was fast-tracked, unusual for such cases, but exactly what he'd expected. The corrupt system wanted to make an example of him. Chen sat at the defense table beside Patel, watching as ADA Powell presented the fabricated evidence to the court with smooth confidence. Judge Harmon nodded along, already decided before the hearing even began. Everything was going according to plan, but not theirs. Chen's plan was about to turn their world upside down. The courtroom buzzed with whispers and sidelong glances. Local reporters filled the back row, pencils poised. This was the biggest case Oakdale had seen in years, wealthy businessmen caught with drugs and dirty money. Officer Wilson sat in the front row looking smug, with Garrett beside him. Chief Reynolds was there too, along with several other officers involved in the corruption network. Judge Harmon adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "The court will now hear preliminary evidence in the case of Oakdale versus Richard Chang." ADA Powell stood, immaculately dressed in a Navy suit. "Your Honor, the state has overwhelming evidence that the defendant has been involved in drug trafficking and money laundering operations throughout our community." As he outlined the case, the cocaine supposedly found in Chen's car, the offshore banking documents conveniently discovered in his home office, Chen watched the faces around him. They were so confident, so certain of their power. They'd done this before, many times, to people who couldn't fight back. Defense attorney Patel raised objections about improper search procedures and evidence handling, but Judge Harmon waved them away with practiced disinterest. "Your Honor," Powell continued, "we have Officer Wilson ready to testify about the defendant's activities." Wilson took the stand, swore to tell the truth, and then proceeded to lie under oath about surveillance he'd conducted and conversations he'd overheard. It was a masterful performance from a man who'd clearly perjured himself many times before. "And what did the defendant say when you questioned him about the narcotics?" Powell asked. "He seemed nervous, tried to change the subject," Wilson replied. "Classic guilty behavior." Chen leaned over to whisper to his attorney. Patel nodded and stood. "Your Honor, before cross-examination, my client would like to address the court directly regarding his identity." Judge Harmon frowned. "That's highly irregular, counsel." "Nevertheless, it's his right," Patel insisted. With visible reluctance, the judge nodded. "Very well. The defendant may make a brief statement." The courtroom fell silent as Chen rose. Gone was the slightly nervous businessman demeanor he'd maintained for months. His posture straightened, his eyes sharpened, and even his voice changed as he addressed the court. "Before I respond to these allegations," he said clearly, "I need to establish my actual identity for the record." He reached into his jacket pocket. Officer Garrett tensed, hand moving toward his weapon, but relaxed when Chen pulled out only a small leather wallet. "My name," he continued, "is Robert Chen. I am the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, operating under Executive Order 13,526 in an undercover capacity." For 3 heartbeats, the courtroom was absolutely silent. Then chaos erupted. "That's ridiculous," shouted Chief Reynolds, half rising from his seat. Judge Harmon banged his gavel. Order, order in the court. Chen opened the wallet, revealing his FBI credentials. Court recorder, please note for the record that I am presenting my official identification as FBI Director Robert Chen. Wilson's face drained of color. Garrett was already backing toward the door when it burst open. 6 men and women in FBI jackets entered, led by Lisa, who Chen hadn't seen in person for months. FBI, she announced. Nobody move. Judge Harmon's gavel pounded frantically. What is the meaning of this? This is my courtroom. And this is a federal investigation into corruption, Your Honor, Chen replied calmly. One in which you are implicated. Powell knocked over his water glass, staring at Chen in horror. This is impossible. We checked you out. Your background was created by the FBI's best, Chen finished for him. Just as the evidence you planted in my residence was documented by our technical team before you ever placed it there. Wilson made a break for the side door but found 2 agents waiting. Garrett raised his hands slowly, his face a mask of disbelief. Chen turned to face the gallery, where other corrupt officers were now trying to edge toward the exits. Every meeting in my house was recorded. Every bribe was documented. Every threat against innocent citizens was captured on video. Judge Harmon, now ashen-faced, quietly slipped off his robe. I'd like to speak to an attorney. You'll have that opportunity, Chen assured him, as will everyone involved in this conspiracy. Looking directly at Chief Reynolds, whose hand was creeping toward his concealed weapon, Chen added, I wouldn't. There are 19 federal agents in and around this building. This operation has been planned for months. The chief froze, then slowly raised his hands. Chen nodded to Lisa, who began reading from a document. By order of the Department of Justice, we are serving warrants for the arrest of the following individuals on charges of corruption, bribery, evidence tampering, false imprisonment, and violation of civil rights under color of law. 6 months after the dramatic courtroom revelation, Robert Chen stood at a podium in the Oakdale Community Center. The room was packed with citizens whose lives had been affected by the corrupt system that had controlled their town for years. Today, I'm not here as FBI director, Chen began, looking across the faces in the crowd. I'm here as someone who lived among you, who saw firsthand the injustice you endured. In the front row sat Mrs. Rodriguez, whose husband had been freed after 3 years of wrongful imprisonment. Beside her was Tom Baker, the shop owner who'd lost everything when he refused to pay bribes. Their eyes held a mixture of pain and hope that made Chen's throat tighten. The aftermath of Operation Clean Slate, as it came to be known, had been even more extensive than anyone expected. 37 arrests across multiple departments. 12 officers, 3 judges, 2 prosecutors, 4 city officials, and even the mayor's chief of staff. The web of corruption had reached everywhere. The trials are ongoing, Chen continued, but already 15 of those arrested have pleaded guilty rather than face the evidence against them. That evidence had been overwhelming. Hours of video and audio recordings, financial records showing millions in bribes flowing through offshore accounts, testimonies from officers who turned state's witness to save themselves, and most stunning of all, a database discovered in Chief Reynolds' home safe, a detailed record of every person they'd framed, every business they'd extorted, every case they'd fixed. The hardest part of my job, Chen said, his voice softening, wasn't living undercover or gathering evidence. It was witnessing injustice and having to wait to act. Seeing people like you suffer while I played a role. He glanced toward the back where Lisa stood with several agents who'd supported the operation. They'd worked tirelessly in the months since, reviewing every case handled by the corrupt officials over the past decade. So far, 19 wrongfully convicted people had been released, with more cases under review. Some have asked why the FBI director himself would go undercover for such an operation, Chen acknowledged. The answer is simple. When the system is broken at every level, when those meant to enforce the law are the ones breaking it, extraordinary measures are required. In Washington, there had been mixed reactions. Some politicians criticized Chen for endangering himself and overstepping his role. Others praised his courage and commitment to justice. A congressional hearing on police corruption had featured his testimony as its centerpiece, with reform legislation now moving through committees. The road ahead won't be easy, Chen told the Oakdale residents. Rebuilding trust takes time. The new officers being trained, the oversight systems being implemented, these are just the beginning. In the months since the arrests, Oakdale had appointed an interim police chief from outside the department. Judge Harriet Lee, brought in from the next county, was reviewing hundreds of questionable convictions. Community oversight boards were forming, with citizens having a real voice in how their town was policed. After the formal remarks, Chen spent hours talking with residents one-on-one. An elderly man gripped his hand with tears in his eyes. "My grandson was given 10 years for something he didn't do. He's coming home next week because of you." A young woman approached hesitantly. "I was too scared to report what happened to me," she said quietly. "Those officers threatened my family. But now," she straightened her shoulders, "now I'm ready to tell my story." As evening fell, Chen walked through downtown Oakdale one last time. The coffee shop where he'd started many mornings as Richard Chang. The park where he'd gathered intelligence while appearing to read the newspaper. The neighborhoods where he'd witnessed both the worst of corruption and the resilience of ordinary people. His phone rang, a call from Washington about another case, another city. The work never ended. But as Chen looked back at Oakdale, he knew that sometimes, against all odds, justice could prevail. Sometimes one person, willing to take a risk, could help break a system of corruption that had seemed untouchable. That knowledge would carry him forward into whatever challenges came next.